Hollywood has no wonders in old age, and Gene Hackman, a legendary icon who once dominated an era, now lies cold and lifeless in a silent house. No fanfare, no spotlights, no final applause, only the smell of decay mixes with the echo of death shrouded in unanswered questions. Missing for 9 days, prescription drugs strewn across the table, a loyal dog just coldly registering the final beats of an exhausted heart. No one knows exactly what happened behind those closed doors. But one undeniable truth remains constant. Gene Hackman and his wife left this world in a scene far darker than any script Hollywood has ever dared to write. Accident? Crime? Or were they secretly planning their own final act? 5 theories. 5 doors leading to personal hell. Every door reeked of death and the shadow of unspoken lies. The house was eerily quiet. Not a single sound. Not a single sign of life. Faded curtains hung limply, blocking out the pale light of the dreary afternoon. The worn wooden floor of the dirt lock, a small hall where shoes, coats, and other knickknacks usually lay, was marked by age, scarred, and weathered like the dusty memories of the house's aging inhabitants. Yet amidst the seeming silence, there was a presence colder than any breeze that filtered through the cracks. Gene Hackman lay there, not in his bed, not in the living room where he sat quietly every evening, but sprawled on the floor in the laundry room. His posture was not natural. His large body slightly curled, one arm stretched towards the door. His fingers clenched as if he was trying to grab something invisible. His face was calm, but not like the peace of sleep or the peace of a man at the end of his life. It was the silence of something suddenly broken, not painful, but disturbingly unnatural. There were no visible signs of injury on his body, no bruises, no cuts. No signs of struggle or violence. At first glance, the police dismissed any suspicions of a violent entry or attack from outside. But it was this absence, this unsettling cleanliness, that became the most suspicious detail. Gene Hackman fell as if someone had flipped a switch without warning or resistance. In the darkness of unanswered questions lay a silent witness, something that could document his final journey without words. Deep in his chest lay a pacemaker. A tiny device that kept his heart beating faithfully for countless years. And it was this silent device that left the most memorable mark. According to the coroner's report, Gene Hackman's pacemaker last showed activity on February 17th, not February 26th, the day his and his wife's bodies were discovered in that ice house. This meant that Gene Hackman died almost 9 days before his wife. For 9 long days his body lay motionless on the laundry room floor, unseen, unknown. The star who had once been adored by Hollywood was now merely a forgotten figure in a silent house where the only sound was the gentle ticking of time, slowly erasing everything. Even more terrifying was the lack of clear warning signs of its decline. Although Gene Hackman was 95 years old, he still lived a modest everyday life, walking around the neighborhood, talking to his longtime wife, and occasionally reflecting quietly in a faded notebook. No one expected that he would break down so suddenly. This event must have been a cardiac arrest caused by an abnormal heart rate. Dr. Michael Badden, a renowned forensic pathologist, explained on Fox Report, the pacemaker served as a little black box that recorded every beat and every missed beat. But why did this rhythm go out of sync so drastically on February 17th, causing Gene Hackman's body to go into irreversible stasis? Was it a simple heart arrhythmia, which is all too common in older people, especially those who have been living with a pacemaker for years? Or was there an external trigger, an invisible catalyst that started a deadly chain reaction in his aging body? Pills scattered on the table. Recipes ready for him and his wife? Did a pill intended for someone else slip into his hand before he took the final steps into his fatal trap? Still unknown. This is where Gene Hackman fell, right next to the front door, which has sparked endless speculation. Did he try to go outside for help because he felt an invisible flood inside him? Or maybe he felt an approaching storm in his chest and instinctively moved to the nearest threshold, hoping to survive it? Nobody knows. All that remains is the silent pacemaker, the only faithful witness to Gene Hackman's final moments in this cold and lifeless dirty trap, where only whispers of the past remain. When the bathroom door opened, the first thing the investigator noticed was not the expected cleanliness of the bathroom in a quiet home occupied by an elderly couple. Instead, there was disturbing chaos. Pills of various colors lay scattered across the counter. falling to the floor and slipping into the cold cracks between the tiles. An empty pill bottle lay on its side, the top torn off, as if it had been ripped open in a moment of panicked desperation. A small space heater had fallen over nearby, its cord hanging loosely as if someone was clinging to it, desperately trying to keep their balance, but to no avail. And right there, in the middle of the bathroom floor, where the white tiles reflected the pale, tired light of the fading afternoon, lay Betsy Arakawa, the woman once known as the pianist's wife. Her body felt limp, as if every muscle had given way long before her last breath. There were no signs of violence, fighting or confrontation, but it was the lack of anxiety that made the scene even more disturbing. Betsy didn't die peacefully in her sleep. She collapsed just outside the bathroom door, her body halfway between trying to crawl out and completely giving in to the weight of her own waning strength. Her head rested lightly on the doorframe and her right hand stretched out toward the corridor. A corridor that, just a few steps away, led to the filthy trap where Gene Hackman had lain motionless for days. At first glance, it could have been dismissed as a simple fall, which happens all too often in older people with balance problems. But when you piece together every bit of the scene, the fallen radiator, the scattered pills, the unnatural position she was in, a much more disturbing picture emerged. This was no ordinary accident, but a desperate, silent struggle against something invisible and implacable, something that was closing in on Betsy's body and mind, drawing her into an abyss she could neither name nor escape. Layers of pill blister packs lay on the bathroom counter like hidden chapters of a story no one had fully discovered. Thyroid medications typically prescribed for conditions such as Hashimoto's thyroiditis or other endocrine disorders. Blood pressure tablets, a reliable solution for older people whose well-being depends on the numbers that flash on the blood pressure monitor every morning. And Tylenol, a seemingly harmless but silent witness to countless domestic tragedies across America. It was not unusual for an elderly couple to have such a collection of medicines, but the mess in which they were found, particularly because many of the pills had been forcibly torn from their packaging and there was no clear record of who had taken them, raised disturbing questions. What exactly happened before Betsy fell to the floor? Panic attack? Sudden heart attack? Or maybe something much worse, something no one has ever dared to imagine? The bathroom often holds secrets that people think they can hide. An anonymous researcher once said, reflecting on such cases, the bathroom is a place where people meet in their most exposed state, literally and figuratively. Here they shed all masks and reveal the silent pain, the stains spreading beneath their skin, and the buried thoughts they have pushed to the farthest recesses of their minds. For Betsy, the bathroom wasn't just a place to store medicine. It might as well have become a battlefield, where she fought for every remaining breath as her own body turned against her while the only person who could save her, Gene Hackman, lay unconscious just a few feet away. The scariest thing wasn't the overwhelming list of medications or the mess left on the bathroom floor. It was a question no one could answer. What really happened in the 9 days between Gene's death and Betsy's death? Did she know that her husband was already dead? Or had she spent those 9 days alone, moving around the house, frantically going through each pack of pills and dragging her weakened body from room to room, desperately searching for a way to stay alive within the cold, indifferent walls of their once shared home? After feeling dizzy, did she lean on an overturned radiator? Or was she trying to carry it around with her, hoping it would warm her increasingly fragile body when the only warmth in the house had disappeared 9 days earlier? Every tiny detail created a haunting living tapestry, a portrait of an aging couple who once lived quietly in the long shadow of Hollywood glitz, but now collapsed in their grasp, surrounded by scattered pills, an overturned radiator, and a silence heavier than any tragedy the brain could conjure. In this portrait, each pill that fell to the floor was more than just physical evidence. They were slow, silent drops of time seeping out of life and closing in on loneliness. February 17th. At precisely 11:42, Gene Hackman's pacemaker recorded its last action, a delicate, fleeting signal from the heart of a man who once confidently walked red carpets and held both Hollywood's fame and misfortune in the palm of his hand. But from that moment on, every bioelectric frequency in Gene Hackman's heart fell silent, an absolute silence so ruthlessly complete that even the most rational theories trembled before it. What really happened after 11:42 on February 17th? When Gene Hackman's body was found on February 26, Exactly 9 days after the last flash of his pacemaker, an eerie silence reigned in this modest home. No signs of a struggle, no strange smells in the air, no signs of a violent break-in. The front door was ajar, but all the locks were intact and the security system never stopped working. There were only 2 people in that house, Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa, and the 9 days lasted longer than a lifetime. Police called it the 9-day mystery. The first possibility, and perhaps the most compelling theory, was that Gene Hackman fell first, possibly in the garbage disposal or somewhere between the living room and the front door. A sudden heart attack or a silent, slow complication from the medications he took every morning. Betsy, the woman who had stood by him for the last 30 years of his life, found her husband motionless on the cold floor, panicked and shaking. She tried to call for help, but her hands were too weak. Or perhaps the drugs she took daily had numbed her mind and she couldn't punch out the right numbers. Hour after hour passed in this silent house, with only Betsy's faint breathing and the cold silence emanating from her husband's body. Finally, after countless attempts to call for help, Betsy collapsed alone in the bathroom, where pills lay scattered about like mute witnesses to her desperate fight for survival. The second possibility is poisoning, a scenario that may seem too dramatic for such a reserved, older couple. But the list of drugs found in the house suggested something much more disturbing. Perhaps they accidentally took the wrong pills or took them in dangerously high doses, triggering a cascade of side effects that their aging body simply couldn't handle. Tylenol, seemingly harmless, when combined with certain blood pressure medications, thyroid medications, and even mild sedatives, can cause internal seizures, disrupt heart rhythms, or worse, cause a sudden loss of consciousness that no one would notice until it was too late. A researcher once observed, sometimes the deadliest poisons are those that are taken every day. No exotic toxins, no elaborate murder plans. Sometimes the most terrifying culprit is a simple, familiar pill that penetrates the veins, overwhelms the nerves and sends 2 souls into an unannounced sleep from which there is no return. The third possibility, the most terrifying of all, was the presence of an outside force. Somehow, someone had gotten into Gene and Betsy's house without leaving a trace, breaking down the door, or opening a window. Every surface was spotless, every zipper undamaged. If there was no physical break-in, why did the police immediately confiscate every cell phone in the house? Gene's phone, Betsy's phone, and even the old, seemingly useless tablet? There was a theory that no one dared to say out loud, that someone had taken control of their lives, of the devices they trusted, messages, calls, and even health tracking apps that were directly linked to Gene's pacemaker. If someone were able to infiltrate a remote control system for a pacemaker and disable it or disrupt its rhythm, wouldn't that person have ultimate power? The power to change Gene Hackman's life without even entering the room? The 9 missing days are not just a blank stretch of time. They are a pitch-black tunnel where each passing hour adds another question to the growing mountain of uncertainty. Did Gene die first, Betsy, or were they both led into an inevitable scenario where they were isolated, abandoned, and pushed to the brink of survival solely by their own drugs, their own pain, and the distress signals that no one else ever received? The pacemaker stopped, and yet in the silence his last cry rang out, the last scream, a scream that was only heard 9 days later, when it was far too late, too cruel and disturbingly perfect to be dismissed as mere coincidence. But Zena, a name that seemed small, became the strangest piece in the grim puzzle of the final days in the home of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa. Amidst the corpses, pill bottles and sealed phones, the image of a small dog dying peacefully in an iron cage in the corner of the room sent shivers down every researcher's spine. Zena was no ordinary dog. She was Betsy's pride and joy and her last comfort during her years of isolation. The little medallions that had hung on Zena's collar after each of Betsy's walks at the Westminster Dog Show were still intact on the shelf by the kitchen door. Betsy had no children. Zena was the only 4-legged child to whom she gave her love. Zena never spent more than 3 hours in a cage in one day. For Betsy, the cage was not a place of isolation, but simply a small corner for training or when Zena voluntarily returned to rest. But that night or those days, Zena was locked up, the cage door shut tight, without a bowl of water or a crumb of food. Police found Zena curled up in a ball, her legs tense and her body still cold from the previous days. Initially, Investigators realized it was a different German Shepherd. Perhaps due to a paperwork mistake or simply because they couldn't imagine that a respected show dog would die so alone. This minor professional oversight has inadvertently led to a number of unanswered questions. Did Zina die before or after her owners? If she died first, why? Hunger, thirst, or some other cause? If she died later, why was she silent in the cage, even though all of the dog's senses sensed her approaching end? A loyal dog like Zina, who spent his entire life at his owner's feet, should have scratched at doors, howled and used all his instincts to warn or try to save the people he considered his whole world. But no, Zina was silent. Zina died in the cage, as if someone had extinguished her strongest survival instinct. The cage, dead evidence, suddenly became the subject of a series of bizarre theories. One of the scariest theories. Someone deliberately locked Zina up. No, Betsy, not Jean's. Because if one of them had locked Zina up before she fell, there must have been an extremely urgent, even desperate, reason to do so. But why? Why would an elderly, single couple feel the need to lock their only beloved dog in a cage in a house where there was no sign of forced entry or danger? Another theory. Zina was the first victim. Maybe someone got into the house and incapacitated Zina in some way. Sedatives or some type of light anesthesia. Zina was caged not for her own safety, but for the intruder's convenience. Since Zina was mute, all sounds in this house belonged to those who controlled it. In her panic after finding Jean unconscious, did Betsy lock Zina up to prevent her from scratching at the body? Or had Jean, in a moment of confusion, locked Zina away as a final reflex to protect her from something he recognized but couldn't express? Another shocking detail. Police found a small piece of paper under Zina's thin mattress. Creased, dirty with ink, but the last 3 words were still legible. Take care of her. The letter belonged to neither Betsy nor Jean. There was no indication that a third person had entered the house, but the document was authentic. The only fingerprints on the paper were Betsy's, but the handwriting didn't match any notebook in the house. An anonymous message from an anonymous hand, left under the cold body of a faithful dog. Zina, the dog who once ran across the Westminster stage under bright lights, died in a dark corner of her own house. An old iron cage that replaced the large stage, and an unspoken secret hid her last breath. Death from hunger and thirst? Possible. Dying from extreme panic after seeing something she shouldn't have seen? Not impossible. But why? And who really locked Zina in a cage, only to leave him as a dispensable part of an inexplicable tragedy? Zina could not speak, but her eyes, although closed forever, were perhaps the most terrible, silent witness of the whole story. As the doors to Jean Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's home closed behind police tape, the outside world wanted the truth. 2 silent bodies, a pacemaker that had stopped working for 9 days, pills scattered like a broken image of an event, but none of the pieces were enough to piece together their final story. From the shadows of this silent house, 5 theories emerged. Each theory hoped to fill the void, but left with incurable holes. Theory 1, chain of health events. One afternoon, slower than most, Jean Hackman suddenly collapsed in the laundry room. No sound, no struggle, just an aging body falling in the pale yellow light of the end of the day. Betsy walked in and saw her longtime partner lying still, blue lips and wide eyes. Panic broke out. There was no emergency call button in the small house. The phone was out of reach. She ran to the medicine cabinet, but her shaking hands dropped each bottle. The lids opened, pills spilled onto the floor. Thyroid medications, blood pressure pills, acetaminophen, and other unlabeled pills mixed together. She fell on the bathroom floor, possibly due to a spike in blood pressure. Maybe her weak heart couldn't stand the shock. The small heater next to her fell over, and the power cord sparked briefly before going out. No one knows how long Betsy lay there before everything really stopped. But why did Jean's pacemaker stop on February 17th, 9 days earlier? If Jean collapsed in front of Betsy, how could she survive almost 10 days without food, without water, and just waiting? Theory 2, drug or food poisoning. The open pill bottles on the vanity and bathroom floor weren't just a sign of panic. Experienced researchers knew that these mixed pills could be a clue to a fatal error. Could the new prescription, issued in early February, have contained a drug with side effects that caused the stroke? Or worse, the pills were mixed not by Betsy's mistake, But by an unseen hand? When the toxicology report was released, no potent toxins were found. But the slow chemical reactions that result from combining legal drugs are a different story. An elaborate medical trap. Probable. But who had the patience and malice to set it? Theory 3. The heating system and the mysterious poisonous gas. The little radiator next to Betsy wasn't new. It was a radiator she had purchased at a local thrift store because she liked its vintage look. But old objects have their own stories. And not all stories are neat. Police found no carbon monoxide. But it was just one of a long list of potentially toxic gases that could be produced by a faulty heater. An invisible, colorless, odorless gas that seeped into both lungs stopped Jean's heart and then slowly extinguished Betsy's gentle breathing. The only problem: there is no physical evidence to support this theory. Theory 4. External interference. No signs of forced entry. No surveillance cameras recording strange figures. No witnesses hearing unusual sounds. But both phones were immediately confiscated. An unusual step if it was just a natural death. Someone entered the house and left no trace, no message, but a real tragedy. A professional who knew how to manipulate Jean's heartbeat and how to create a clean scene as if no one had died. Theory 5. Death by mutual consent. Suicide pact. These two words rang out in the police chief's briefing room. When two life partners are faced with nameless diseases, fear of aging and silent death, they may have decided to part ways together. A silent agreement. An unwritten pact. But Jean's pacemaker stopped 9 days before Betsy died. If there was an agreement, why was the difference so large? And who put a closed cage for Zena, the only four-legged witness, as if to silence every desperate bark? 5 theories. 5 paths leading to a dense maze. Every road leads to a dead end. In this dead end, 2 names, Jean Hackman and Betsy Arakawa, quietly disappear, leaving a cold void where the truth may be buried forever. Amid the remains of cold bodies, scattered pills and a silent pacemaker, Jean Hackman and his wife left a maze with no exit. The truth still lurks in the mud of secrets, waiting for someone to dare to reveal it.